And here I was thinking today was going to be the last part. Every week I think we're going to be doing the last part. But we have more. I really like and I really enjoy when I can take, just to get to that one verse, we read a chapter and a half, just to get to a verse that said the word crown in it. You know, back in the day, I would have just focused on the verse where the word crown was in there. But I'm realizing that in order to give you right context and fullness of understanding, we may have to read a whole chapter or two. I even threw in stuff that's not even in my notes, Philippians 2 and Ephesians 2 and other things that aren't in the notes, but that's okay. People are watching, they'll realize that's where they had to go. Also, but that's the whole thing, is that we really need a 5-hour teaching straight through just to do the little piece I did, where I would have read all of Ephesians 2 and other things from Philippians 2, but I try to fit it into 70 minutes, but that's okay, we do another part. But you see, that's the problem that you should also understand when you have people asking you to explain something, and you should realize to explain it, you may have explained 6 other things that they don't know, and explain those 6 things, you might have explained 5 other things for that. Because I had a friend ask me one time, he's somewhat of an atheist, and he asked me something, and I said, I can't explain it to you now. He goes, oh, blah, 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 blah. I said, no. I said, if we have 8 or 10 hours and you're willing to sit, I can try. But to answer your one question, I'd have to teach and explain 17 different things that you don't know just to make that answer make any sense. And each of those 17 things may need other things explained just to answer your question, because you have no context for it. In other words, you don't know the Bible. You're coming from an atheistic sort of point of view. You have never studied it. So I will use terms and understanding that you would never understand. So that's why, for example, the heart of the matter took 64 parts. Theoretically, to explain to you about endurance and receiving the crown of life, I should have to review the entire book to really explain it to you, because it's all there. And so that's why I want you to be more reluctant to just try to answer everybody's questions when they don't really have the understanding of what you're talking about. And then you wonder why they come back at you showing and demonstrating that they really didn't understand a word you said. And the reason is because they really didn't. They didn't understand. All right, so this is the afterburn part. This is where we take questions and comments about the teaching. So if you have any, you can raise your hand. If you're online, Craig is monitoring that. And we'll begin with Dawid.
Quick question, and it may be very simplified or maybe not so simple. Can you define and or tell us what it looks like to let?
To let. Okay, the letting the mind. That's probably best done in discipleship with mentoring, because you won't recognize necessarily when you are getting in the way. And that's really what you're asking, all right? How do I know when I'm not letting? All right, or how do I know when I am letting the mind be in me? Okay, again, let's go back to I think we talked about this last week, we'll talk about it again, the 3 voices that are in your head. All 3 of them try to claim to be the Father, and only one of them is the voice of the Father. Okay, and the other 2 mostly is you and Hasatan, and your voice will try, and so will Hasatan, try to convince you that they are him, that they are the Father's voice. And so it's hard for you to know whether or not you're letting it or not without guidance and mentoring, so that when you talk to someone who can help you identify, hello, time out, this is where you're listening to your voice, not his. This is where you're not letting his mind be in you. It's not easy to do on your own. Some of it's obvious. When you first come into Torah Observance, you can quickly see what the book says and what you've been thinking don't match. Some of it's a lot more subtle. As you fix the easy things, the other stuff becomes tougher to pull out because it's more subtle. That's where you need somebody to help you. Someone who gets to know you, who you can go to and say, this is what was going on, this is what I was thinking. And then the person can help you say, yes, that's what you were thinking, but that's not what he was thinking. And they can see that from outside, something you would not notice in yourself so easily. Does that make sense? So that's what you're going to need. You're going to need someone to help you. And I help you with that already, so that's kind of exactly what it's going to take. Yes. So he said, so in essence, it would be submission to authority where you're not sure. Actually, it would be submission to authority because even when you are sure, you could be wrong. I have people on a regular basis come to be totally convinced that the Father is telling him something or leading him some way or whatever it is, when that's not actually going to match up with this. Okay? And that's where we end up banging heads a little bit, but that's because they're not letting his mind be in them. They still want what they want. Look, when it comes down to it, when what you want somehow interferes with what he says and what he wants, that's when you're not letting the mind be in you. When his mind is in you, you never have a problem being able to see and make the right decisions when things come up, because his mind will always make the right decisions. But it's the I don't like, I don't want, I prefer, it's the I's that get in the way. All right? And so that's one of the ways you can notice it is when you start hearing yourself saying but, or I don't, that's you. All right? That's mostly you. When you start worrying about your preferences. Well, that's not fair. Why do I have to do that? Well, I don't want to do that. That's all where we're getting in trouble. That's not the Abram saying, hine ni, here I am, and then just being sent where he had to go. Okay? He didn't get to say, or you never hear him saying, where are we going? Maybe I don't want to go where you want me to go. Maybe I don't like that place. Well, I like it here. Why do I have to leave? See, that's all the preferences stuff. And so when your preferences are being involved, it's probably not letting the mind of him be in there.
I just wanted to comment on what you said about basically when things go wrong, how people react. It really does speak volumes about the person and how grounded they are in their faith. It is tremendous. And I just have to say, actually watching you has really inspired me in that way. Especially after everything that happened at Sukkot and all of the stuff following that, the tragedy that happened, and then trying to find a place. We didn't have a place. I mean, you were probably the most burdened person after all the stuff, trying to manage everything and trying to do all kinds of things. And yet you did not look stressed, if that makes sense. Like, you were obviously really, you were tired and everything, but you did not look like your whole world was a house of cards that just fell. That was not what you looked like. And coming from an environment where, most people that I interact with, something goes wrong and that's it. They lose it. And so it was really hard for me to come out of that. I was like, I need an example. How do you handle stress? How do you handle anxiety? And just after everything that happened and just watching how you handled that was really a big inspiration.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. I really do. And there's other people in the room here who, when they come to me sometimes in extreme stress points, and I help them breathe it down and calm them down. That's what you need, though, in the shepherd to do, And so I'm glad that that's something that I'm able to do for people. But again, if you have a leader, and a lot of people are watching, maybe you have a leader who, instead of helping calm it down, only throw more gas on the fire, that's probably somebody who's not really as qualified for their position as they need to be, because I don't, and again, maybe this has to do with anointing and calling. I don't actually have to consciously think about not reacting in that way. It's what he's given me to do. My father, who didn't always approve of everything I did, and he's very proud of me now, but he'll tell you, if you asked him, that there was one thing he always knew about me, is that I was always the right person to be in the middle of something when everything was going wrong all over the place. That's one of the gifts or talents that some people have, okay? And so, but you want that as an example. You need that in a leader for the calmness, because everybody feeds off of you, okay? And so the more angry, the more hyper, the more frustrated, the more then everybody else is going to feed off of that, okay? And so if you want the body to be a certain way, you have to understand they are going to imitate you whether you want them to or not. Now, sometimes they'll imitate more, well, let me say this differently. More often, they will imitate the bad things you do than the good things you do more quickly. And so you got to be really careful of what you're doing. The stuff you'd like them to imitate, they may be very reluctant to do. The stuff you don't want them, boy, you're like, why'd you have to imitate that of all things? Well, everybody's being watched. You're being watched, especially if you're in front of a mic, if you're in front of a room. But also you're being watched even when you're not in front of the mic, as Kara pointed out. She saw how I handled different things from Sukkot through the tragedy and everything else that's been going on. And look, we still don't have a property. We still don't have a place that we can meet regularly. We still have a lot of things that are like a lot of balls juggling in the air. But, it is what it is. And we have to go forward. And so if you go back to the colors that we studied with the colors, that's probably also the benefit to having a leader that is like 90% red, because that is a much more pragmatic, logical, calm level to be when it comes to crisis. Okay, now they may not be all that patient in other things when just things are not getting done, and that's the bad side of it. But when things are going wrong, that's who you want in the middle of it. Okay, you don't want the blue or the white or the yellow at that point. You need a red in the midst of all that to say, everything's going to be fine. This can be handled. So it's going to work out, because that's what we do. Okay? And then if somebody yellow can come by, they'll say, and we'll make it fun. We're doing it too. Okay? While the red's handling it, I'll help making sure it's fun. Okay, so, but the just saying is, I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate that, especially coming from some of the younger people in the room, to say that they're starting to see that we're putting together mentorship and elders. And that should not just be me. It should be all of the people who are in their 50s and 60s, easily as being there to be, the gray-headed, so to speak, the ones who have more years of experience. We should be setting the better example, because they're watching us. And if we're panicking, they're going to be like, whoa. Then absolutely I should be panicking, because after all, they have all this experience and they know what's going on. If they think this is a scary thing, then probably it's a scary thing. Problem is, most of us get to 50s and 60s and we never develop the maturity on how to handle crisis. And so we fall apart and everybody else around us falls apart. And so that's where it becomes tough.
Lola asked, can Rabbi extend a little on the crown of eternal life in teens, please? That she has 2 teens watching now. Okay,
wait, ask the question again. I didn't understand. So explain more about the crown of life in relation to teens. Is that what it was? Yeah. Okay, I'm not really sure what you're actually asking, but for the teenagers that are listening, okay, this life that you're on, that you're just barely getting started on, as you're now coming into, somewhat of an adulthood where you actually are starting to have responsibility for yourself. That it's at this point, teenagers, that you're actually entering the game, so to speak. I mean, earlier you were being taken care of, provided for, and under the covering of your parents. But as you become older, teens and into adulthood, you're now going to be running your own race. It's your relationship with your Creator that's going to matter, not your parents. It's your relationship with the Creator that's going to determine, how much that mind is in you is going to determine what you choose to do and not to do. And your Father in heaven and your Messiah are watching you, and they're taking note. And by taking note, I'm not saying they're marking things against you. They're taking note of saying, okay, there may be some things that we either have to cause or allow to happen in their lives to wake them up to something they're not realizing they need to work on. Because that reaping and sowing thing is absolutely a law, just like anything in physics or chemistry or biology, whatever makes the universe function, reaping and sowing is a law. And so the teenagers, as you're doing things, what you do is going to bring some sort of a reaping from the Father in terms of helping to get you to be on the straight path. So he may let you suffer. He may cause you to suffer just to wake you up if you need some waking up. But also you'll receive blessing. You'll receive all kinds of little evidences when you're doing things the right way, when you're going in the right direction. But realize as a teenager, if you're 13, 14, 15, you're heading for this soon. If you're 18, 19, going into 20, you're almost on top of it where this becomes now your problem. Okay, your parents will always care and they'll think it's their problem, but it's not. It's going to become yours. And that transference is a little tough on the parents, but it's a reality that this now becomes yours. And then it becomes your problem, though, to still appreciate the parents' wisdom, the parents' guidance, and start seeking it different than just waiting for them to just give it to you without asking. You need to now realize that you have an opportunity to ask for it, to seek their understanding, wisdom, and discernments, to look for those that can mentor and guide you. So parents, it's your job to provide them with that environment where they will then know that they can come to you, that you don't have to always jump in there and provide it without them asking. Okay? So hopefully that answered the question somewhat.
And I think I'm trying to remember exactly how it was worded on the Torah study about Yaakov and how he had kind of said, I will give my tithe after I come back. And I think he related to that to a child needing that revelation of Yah on their own kind of terms, not necessarily through their parents as well. Was that something that maybe you could?
All right, so in Genesis 28:22, This is where Yaakov, goes to sleep, and he's got a promise that he makes here at the end of the chapter, where he says, "Then this stone which I've set as a standing stone shall be Elohim's house, and all that you give me, I shall certainly give a tenth to you." So he's basically, what I said was, he's on a journey, as we all are, where he has some revelation of Yahweh, because he did have a dream, and Yahweh did affirm promises to him in verse 13, and see, Yahweh stood above it, this ladder that he dreams about, and he says, "I am Yahweh your Elohim." So he has some understanding through this dream, but just because he has an understanding doesn't mean he had the relationship. All of Israel came out of Egypt, okay, with an understanding, but not necessarily a relationship. They saw the signs and wonders. The relationship comes out of a personal revelation. And I don't mean this from a charismatic or churchy sort of way. I mean, he has to reveal himself by giving you eyes to see and ears to hear, and reveal himself to you. We said this in the Father and the Son teaching, that the Father has to reveal the Son, and the Son has to reveal the Father. So we're not talking about revelation in this very churchy sort of way. I'm saying it's about him personally revealing himself to you so that you end up with a relationship and not just information. So here you have Yaakov with some information and some relationship where he's saying, look, and when I have returned, verse 21, to my father's house in peace, and Yahweh has been my Elohim, in other words, I'm going to give this a try, and when you've returned me to my father's house in peace, then I will give a tenth of everything you gave me to you. In other words, this is still almost like a fleece. He says, I'm still trying to understand how this really plays out to me. I know you had a relationship with my father and with my grandfather, but Yaakov is saying, I'm trying to understand now your relationship with me. Because Yahweh made promises to him. And so look, one of the things I said to parents on Tuesday, and I'll say it here, which I think is very important, you could be the rabbi's son or daughter. You could be the person who's just a carpenter or whatever. It doesn't matter what your title or background. You could have been in this 5 minutes or 500 years. Well, none of you are going to be that old. 50 years or 60 years. And it doesn't mean that your children, when they're born to you, are automatically going to do what you're doing or see what you see. They're all going to need a personal revelation. Now, some are given that revelation from the womb to some degree. They just seem like they're born with it. They seem to just have a relationship. Others are not. The ones with it are very much more, rare. It's not as often as then the ones that have to have it later in life. I wasn't born with that revelation. I didn't get it till I was in my 20s, okay? I have a daughter that absolutely has that revelation. She's had it since she was born. She's always seemed to have a relationship with him. I don't take any credit for that. Raised my son exactly the same way. He's still working on it. Nothing to be a negative on him. I thought, my wife and I were thinking, well, what have we not done with him that we did with her? Nothing to do with that. Abba has to reveal himself. That verse is true for everyone. We can't get around it. So parents, don't be frustrated with your children. By the way, almost all you parents, I've sat down with the Gadol class. Guess what? They're all struggling with the same stuff. They have not yet necessarily had their personal revelation. That is not a negative on your parenting. But they get to that point where they have to have their own revelation. They've had yours up to this point, your testimony, your experience. But by the way, so don't get mad at me for sharing that in front of all you guys. I'm not exposing something that you now got to go quiz them on. Allow them the space for Abba to reveal himself in his time to them. There's no way around it. What you can do is just set the right example and let them see the fruit in your life. By the way, if your being in this has not borne good fruit and all they see is fighting, yelling, screaming, and disaster, why would they want it? What are you showing them? Are you showing them something they should desire? Did they see your life before and after and see that it improved? Because some of them were already born before and after you came into this. Have things gotten better? Do they see fruit? Are they seeing a difference? They should, and it should be a good one. That will help them on the journey. But just because you raised them, maybe from birth in Torah observance, doesn't mean that they're automatically going to get it and embrace it the way you do now because you had it revealed later in life and he got your attention and disturbed your peace. You know what? He may have to disturb theirs too. But they'll have a huge advantage. They'll know what you taught them. And they'll get the revelation that what you taught them was right. If you taught them right. Does that make sense? Is that what you were looking for, Craig? Okay? But this is going to be hard for you parents. When your kids get into the Gadol class, 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way to 19, you cannot assume, and don't be upset with them, you cannot assume that they're just naturally, because you are fully on board with this stuff, that they're going to be fully on board. They have to have a relationship created between them and the Creator. Right now, you've given them a lot of information. Until he gives them the relationship, that's all they have. All right? And don't take it on yourself that if that doesn't happen at your timing, it's not your timing, it's his timing. And you could do everything perfect. It's not going to change anything. It's going to be his timing.
In Philippians 3:9, what does the law refer to in Hebrew? Does he mean his own works, or does it relate to Torah? Thank you.
Okay, so he says, so now he says, what is more, I even count all to be lost because of the excellence of the knowledge of Messiah Yeshua, my master, for whom I have suffered the loss of all, and count them as refuge in order to gain Messiah, and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through belief in Messiah, the righteousness which is from Elohim on the basis of belief. What Messiah does is it takes the law of Torah and gives you the fullness of what it was intended. In other words, Paul was doing the letter of the law up to this point. And the letter of the law doesn't avail anything necessarily in itself. It's in belief. Look, the people walking in the desert, a lot of them got laid low. They were keeping the letter of the law, but they didn't have the belief. They were doing it for the wrong reasons, mechanically, without belief, without faith and trust that in doing so, they would receive the crown. They were doing it just out of fear, literally, of being killed. They'd watched Yahweh zap enough people, so they literally had fear. But it wasn't awe and respect fear. Okay? So this is the same thing Yeshua came to teach when he says in Matthew 5, he said, look, you know of old where it says, and he tells a law, the law of murder, the law of adultery. I'm going to tell you the fullness of it, which takes belief. You have to believe in the fullness of the intent of the law, which is not to have a mindset of murder or mindset of lusting after adultery. So he's addressing the mind and the heart that leads to the action. So Paul's saying it's through Messiah that I gain the mindset. Does that make sense now? Okay, it's through belief in Messiah that I'm gaining the mindset behind the reason why the law is important and good and has an effectiveness. That's why it's so effective.
Okay, from Robert Anderson, he asked, what does it mean in 1 Peter 4:15 to, he's got it in parentheses, suffer as an evildoer or a doer of evil?
And by the way, when we're dealing with that thing in Philippians, be careful that we don't fall into that whole Christian thing where somehow we're comparing the law is no good and Messiah, just believe in Messiah and that's it. What Paul is trying to demonstrate is that belief in the law by itself wasn't enough. Okay? But, we're told that our righteousness has to exceed even the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. Exceed doesn't mean do less. It means do what they're doing plus more. So let's be careful with that mindset. Okay, 4:15 in 1 Peter. For do not let any of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or a doer of evil or as a meddler. But if one, so what he's trying to compare is this. A lot of the people were suffering, and they're all whining about their suffering when they were suffering for righteousness. He says, oh, no, if you're suffering for doing evil, well, you deserve it. Don't whine about it. You earned it. You deserve it. That's fine. He's saying he's trying to compare earned and deserved suffering with that which is undeserved, but you suffer anyway, where people are going to make you suffer and you did nothing to deserve it. So he's trying to compare those two things. He said, but if one suffers being Messianic, let him not be ashamed, but let him esteem Elohim. He's trying to compare when you suffer, when you should not. He says, look, when you suffer and you deserve it, he says, don't let any of you suffer as a murderer and all that stuff. He says, don't be doing all that stuff and then whine about your suffering. If you're doing that stuff, you deserve what you get. He says, no righteousness, no benefit for that. He says, however, this goes back to verse 14, which says, if you are reproached for the name of Messiah, you are blessed. You're not blessed just because you suffer. In other words, suffering is not what brings blessing. He's saying suffering undeservedly for the name of Messiah, for the authority of Messiah, that's what brings blessing. And so he's comparing two sufferings. So hopefully that makes some sense.
Christine Jett regarding leadership and mentoring. She says she's not trying to open up a huge can of worms, and it would be difficult for somebody that doesn't see how the body here functions. How do women fit into this leadership picture?
How do
women
Oh, women, okay. All right, so how do women fit into the leadership picture? Okay, well, they do fit into it. First of all, we have verses that say that the women, the older ones especially, are supposed to be teaching and raising up the younger ones. Okay, feeding into and planting into the younger ones. Of course, the younger ones need to be coming to the older ones and asking for that kind of help. The older ones are not going to go and impose themselves. Of course, by older, we have to be careful. It's not just because of the gray in their hair, because some of the ones with the gray in their hair have only been doing this for a year or two because Abba just chose to call them later in life. That doesn't mean they don't have wisdom in other areas, though. They may know a lot about being a woman since they've been living longer than you have as a woman. Okay, but the thing is, when it comes to the Torah parts, be careful. Just because they're older doesn't necessarily mean that they're older in the walk, but we have to be from that point of view. Now, as far as leadership is concerned, I know the real question that women are always trying to get me to answer, and so I'll give you the answer I always give, which is, what about women in leadership? Okay, there's no commandment against women being in leadership. So I don't have a problem with that. However, ladies, I think you'll agree with me when I make the following statement. Until I get the men to step up and do what they need to do, if I put you up in that role, they'll never do it. You know that's true. If I put you ladies up in front of the room and doing leadership roles before I get the men to do it, they will kick back, open up a beer, and say, that's great, you do it. I'm just trying to be honest. Ladies, your lives will be so much better if I get your men doing what they need to do first. And guess what? We're not even close at the moment. And you know it. So do I have any problem putting ladies up in the front? No. Giving ladies an opportunity to do some sort of leadership role? No. There is a proper alignment of roles, okay? And that alignment of roles requires that I get the men doing their role first and getting that fixed. Because most of the problem in the world and the body is the men dropping the ball, and then because they dropped the ball, the ladies jumping in, and that just compounded the problem. And so the whole thing's out of order and screwed up. If the men understood their role and did it, then the ladies would be more likely just to do theirs and not jump in, but the ladies jump in because we keep screwing it up. And it doesn't help ladies, by the way. It might seem like it's short term that it does, but long term it's doing more damage than good. And so, yes, there is a place for the ladies, especially with the other ladies. All right? But we have a body filled with men and women that don't understand their roles. I don't have men who know what it means to be a man according to the way Yahweh created a man. And women don't know how to be a woman according to the way Yahweh created a woman. And I'm not talking about your typical sexist churchianity idea. I'm just saying to truly understand when he said, let us make man in our image, what did he actually have in mind? And when he then took woman from the man and made woman, what did he actually have in mind? What does that look like to him? Not to us, not to society, not to liberals or conservatives or whatever. What does it actually look like scripturally? And we will be doing teachings on that at some point, okay? Because that's a huge problem in the body. Now, we do have men, a men's group that does meet, and actually we haven't had a meeting in a while. We need to have another meeting. It's hard in this building where we don't have a place to go so easily. But we were meeting every 2 weeks with the men, working on that one single thought. What does it look like, and how do we become like that image that the Father had when he made man? And then we're going to do the same thing for the ladies as well. Maybe what we'll do is we'll alternate weeks. We'll have the men one week and the ladies the other week. And then we can work that out, okay? And we're going to have to start that schedule again. We'll try to pick it up, if not in December, sometime by January for sure. We'll try to get that schedule actually officially written out so we know what weeks. I'll put it in the announcements. Don't forget, next week is the men or the lady, whatever we're doing, because I know we need this. Okay? We desperately need this.
So it seems like we have trial after trial after trial. How do you know if you are just not getting the lesson, or if you're being punished or disciplined, or if you are being refined?
All right, so everybody, you heard the question. What's the answer? Yes. No, what's the answer? How do you know what the answer to what she's asking? Counsel. The way you know is you counsel. So you guys have got to be paying better attention. When these things come up, when you don't know what to do, your first thought has got to be that you need counsel. Because see, with counsel, I can find out in discussing it with you if the trials you're going through are similar or different. If they're similar, maybe there is something you're not getting that needs to simply be fixed. If it's similar or different, it will tell me a lot also as to whether or not it's time and chance or some other thing. Counsel. See, the problem with you guys, and I'm not surprised, is your default is not counsel. We need to change your default to counsel. I hear all the time, and I won't mention any names in this room, and you know who you are. It's almost all of you, by the way. Where I'll hear about stuff you're going through, and a person will talk to me about it and wonder if they've already counseled with me, and I'll be like, no. And they'll act surprised. And I'm not surprised because you guys don't do it like you should. I don't know if you're embarrassed. I don't know if you're afraid. I don't know if it's pride. I don't know what it is. But I hear about things, and then I'm always like, he hasn't come to me. She hasn't come to me. So why aren't you counseling? Why am I hearing it second and third hand? That's why those Ephesians 4 fivefold ministry guys are supposed to be there so that you have them available to you, and you have to take advantage of it. Don't think this is the problem. You may think that you're going to be wasting my time or leadership's time or whatever. You know what? Let leadership draw the boundaries of when you're coming for things you don't need to come for. I'd rather you come for things you don't than not come at all and then not come for the things you should. Let me tell you that's something you should handle yourself. Let me tell you you don't need to come to me for that. Come too much and let me kind of bring that down. They're not coming enough. Does that make sense? But don't be offended when I tell you you should be able to handle that yourself. Okay? But I am inviting you to do that. So the answer, Lori Dawn, is, and I know you well enough that you certainly could try to contact me for counsel because I know Lori, and she's in Canada. And so you're very welcome to call me or set up a Skype or whatever we need to do, and we can counsel and see what exactly it is that's going on, and then allow the Ruach hopefully to give me some sort of a discernment as to what to interpret out of it so that we can then get to the situation. Now, a lot of you have done this counseling and have seen it done, and you see that it works. Of course, some of you have seen it work, and you still don't come like you should. You wait till things get out of hand or you don't come soon enough. That's why counsel's available. But you're afraid of it. You don't trust it. You think it gives me too much power, whoever you're counseling with too much power. Whatever it is, okay, then stay home and suffer. Don't talk to somebody. But you need the help. Come cautiously and just give it a try. I mean, that's all you can do.